Hello, my friends. Jerry Rosa here on the frozen tundra. Oh my gosh, take a look at this. Yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like the frozen tundra. It really does. It seriously does. That's a view looking right out the door here this morning. Oh my gosh, it's single digit cold. Sometimes we're down in the, we're in anywhere from 8 or 9 degrees to 15, 18 degrees, somewhere in there. And it's just been that way for several days. And what's really weird is just a few days ago, it was almost 70 degrees during the day. At night it's really cold, but during the day it was almost 70 degrees. And here we are, I'm burning so much wood that you really seriously would never even have a guess. About every 6 hours right now, I'm putting in about 2 wheelbarrows full of wood. It's just nuts. So guess what I get to do just as soon as I get off of here? Because last time I put wood in was 4 a.m. Oh my goodness. All right, so all you new Itchy Boot followers, I have a rhetorical question for you. If you have been watching Itchy Boots, which since last video I mentioned her, and if you don't know, she's the really brave gal that just rides this motorcycle all over the world. So I have a rhetorical question. Am I the second to last guy on the planet to know about the Darian Gap? Question. And I say second to last because I know I wasn't last because my wife didn't know. So am I the second to last person on the whole planet to not know about the Darian Gap? Now, if you don't know what the Darian Gap is, let me just explain. As a kid, I remember hearing about the Pan American Highway. And you could drive from, Alaska down to the tip of South America, on a highway. Pan American Highway. It connected it all. Wrong. There's the Darian Gap, which is 66 miles approximately of jungle, swamp, rivers, and mountains, not to mention all kinds of nefarious creatures, including lots of nefarious humans. Anyway, really a bad place, and it's between Panama and Colombia. So there's 66 miles with no roads. It's just jungle and stuff. So the Pan American Highway is a myth. You can't drive from, you have to find other means to get through there. You either have to hike through there, which is really dangerous, they say. And I saw some more videos on that, which it does look really dangerous. Not only the critters, but more the humans than anything, I think, is the biggest danger. But then, of course, the swamps and just everything out there is trying to kill you. But either that, you either have to trek through there or you have to take a boat of some sort and go around it. Well, that's what Itchy Boots did. She put her motorcycle in a glorified rowboat and went like 6 or 7 hours trip through the ocean. Oh my gosh. Just completely nuts. She trusts more people. I mean, anyway, you should check her channel out if you haven't watched it. It's pretty amazing. Itchy Boots and the Darian Gap. Check out the Darian Gap. Okay, back to the salt mine here. I forgot to show this picture last week. I was going to show you this. I just think this is a real pretty picture, except that it was sent to me in a format. Emery is a photographer and an artist and everything, and she took this picture, but she took it in a format that I couldn't get converted. So it became pixelated. So it's probably pixelated on your screen, but it is a beautiful picture. I mean, it is just beautiful, and that's just a picture from our really right when you come through our gate, looking up the hill to the right at the old farmhouse. That's the original old farmhouse. So that's the original old farmhouse that was built in the late 1800s here. And my wife, I should say, is presently fixing that up to be an additional rental house, for like people coming here to stay for the weekend or whatever. Anyway, and she's fixing that all up with real old antiques and stuff. It's going to be really cool. Yeah, so there's that. I forgot to show you that picture last week. You notice the weird title on this, Sonny the Wonder Dog. You're gonna absolutely, and I mean seriously, be amazed. And before we even get into that, let me just tell you, I have no reason to lie about any of this. I have no reason to stretch the stories. You're just going to be completely blown away and amazed at the stories I have to tell you about this particular dog. And unfortunately, that's about all we've got, because it's from a time before, smartphones and videos and all that stuff. So anyway, but if you hang with me, you're going to enjoy that. I've got my little notes here I'm trying to follow. My stress level last week, it hasn't improved a ton since last week, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm still pretty stressed, but I did sort of, I put it in big, huge quotes, fix at least some of the power steering problems on my old Ford 4000 tractor. Now keep in mind, that thing's had power steering trouble since pretty much day one. I mean, I've been working on that thing. We got it when I was 10 years old. I'm 67, so I've been pretty much working on that thing since, for 57 years. And that's the truth. Even when I was a kid, I was working on equipment. Anyway, I couldn't tell you. I said I probably fixed that power steering at least 100 times. Well, all right, make that 101, because I got to thinking about it. I did the old Einstein thought experiment, where you think through the whole problem and you try to figure it out. So I got to thinking, it's just overpressurizing itself somewhere. That seems to be the common theme with that thing. So I got to looking at the lid on this power steering. And the lid is a cone shape. It's like an upside down funnel. It's an actual cone shape. And on the inside of that cone, there's a washer, a solid washer with a rivet going through it. And on the outside, the cone inverts again, but it's a smaller inversion cone. So like there's the big cone of the lid, and then on the very tip of that it goes back in like another small cone going in, and there's a small washer on that. And there's a rivet through both washers holding them together. Well, I got to thinking, why would they build it that way? That's kind of screwy, I mean, why would they go to that much trouble to make that when they could just put a lid and be done, Well, I got to thinking that's probably some kind of a vent. Well, sure enough, I got to looking at the big washer on the inside, and it's got 3 little tiny washers in it. I mean, 3 little tiny, tiny holes in it. Really tiny holes. And on the outside, brilliant me, in my infinite wisdom, when I was restoring this tractor about 6 or 7 years ago, I tightened up that rivet as tight as I could get it, because everything was loosey-goosey, it was rattling, and I thought, well, that closed off the lid and the vent completely. So I thought, well, that's probably why it's overpressurizing. So I took a little tiny drill bit and to there was 3 holes on the bottom side, so I just drilled 1 little tiny hole on the top side. I thought that's probably good enough, because that'll let the pressure out. I mean, air goes through, easy. So anyway, sure enough, that seems to have fixed most of the pressurization problem with this thing now. So thank you. I am so thankful that I think I've got at least some of that problem fixed. I don't think it's completely fixed, because that system has never worked well, ever. But that helped my stress a whole bunch right there, because at least now I have one pretty much functioning tractor. Well, then yesterday I took that same tractor and I put the snow plow on it, and I plowed our 3 miles of road to get in here. And I mean, the snow is like 8 to 10 inches deep. It's really deep. I'd say 10 inches, really. So anyway, I had to get the Bobcat out to get the plow unstuck from the ground. It was frozen, and all. It was just complicated. So when I put the Bobcat away, as I was getting ready to shut it down, it stopped working. It won't go forwards. It won't go backwards. 1 step forward, 3 steps backwards. That's my whole life. But then again, yesterday, I fixed yet another little minor thing. This is going to seem so trivial to you all. You will think, why would that cause stress? But it did, and it has for quite a while. You know, I cut so much firewood with the chainsaws that you have to keep the bar greased. Now, in addition to oil, a lot of people never do this, but you can grease the tip of the bar. And when you cut as much firewood as I cut, you better be greasing your bar. That sprocket that's on the end of the nose needs grease. It's got a little tiny hole, and it's made for a little tiny specialized grease gun to put grease in there. Well, I had a cheap plastic one, and I used that for years, and the plastic kept breaking, and I kept mending it as best as I could and taping it and everything else. And so finally, a couple years ago, I bought a metal one off of eBay. And so that's what this is, a little tiny grease gun, little tiny hole right there, and it goes in that little hole on the end of the tip of the thing. And this thing worked really good until it didn't. And the grease, you just poke. You buy little grease cartridges, I guess. Where you get them, I don't know, because this thing's unbranded. I'm sure it's from China. But anyway, I, ran out of grease, so I just filled it back full of grease just with a stick, which you can do real easy. And then you put this plunger back in there and just force it up there. That forces the grease up, and it worked again. But the problem was this little goofy thing would fall over and turn sideways in there, and then it would lose its prime, and it wouldn't work, and you got all that grease in there. It's a big mess, so that's been really stressing me out, believe it or not, because I really have to cut a lot of firewood, and I need a grease gun for that. So finally yesterday, you probably can't see it. Well, you can almost see it, I think. If you see in there, you see that little round circle thing. It's actually white. It probably looks blue because of this blue plastic, I think, that's on there. I think it's blue. That might be green. I don't know. But anyway, so basically I made myself a really good plastic washer for this on my metal lathe, and it fits it like a glove, and it pressurizes this thing perfectly, and I'm happy again. So there's yet another little minor stress thing. I know you probably think, why is he telling us this? We don't care about that. But honestly, these are the kinds of things that drive me crazy. I got so many things to do that I need to count on things. They got to work, I don't have time for them not to work. So that's working now, and I'm really tickled that it is. Trust me. All right, so that's most of the stress reliever. And by the way, the fellow that sent me that email, he's been a longtime supporter of the channel. That he was stressing me out with the questions he asked about why aren't we putting out more, instrument videos, etc. And I told him I'm doing the best I can. And he kind of sent me an email that was kind of apologetic, and I kind of apologized to him too, because it wasn't meant to point him out or anything. I was just saying that if you ever got a letter at the wrong moment in your life, that was the wrong moment, because I was so stressed when that came in here. But anyway, he kind of apologized. He's a very nice fellow, and I just wanted to say publicly that there was no hard feelings, and I just wanted him to know that. Okay, so let's see here. I think we've gone through most of that. As far as I know, Ron's still doing okay, although I haven't talked to him in the last few days. A few shop projects here. There's a video that Emery is working on, and Emery's not working too much right now because of all the snow. She just doesn't want to get out in it and mess with it. But there's a video that she's almost finished with about a Gibson Dove that came here from Wisconsin. I think I mentioned it briefly last week, and you'll really like that video because it's rebuilding one of those fancy bridges, and it was quite a job. And I did that while he waited, and that was one of those other stressful things that I only had to get it done by Monday. I mean, he brought it on a Friday, and I had to Monday to get it done, Okay, I take it back. I think he brought it on a Thursday evening, so I had all day Friday. I mean, I had a whole day. And then Monday to get it finished. I don't typically work on the weekends, although on this case I did work a little bit on that on the weekend too. Okay, the status of the world's finest mandolin ever built by a human. Didn't change very much this week. But I did get all the binding cut out. I had showed it in large strips that I had glued up. Well, I've got them all cut out into little fine strips now, and it turned out really good. I also thinned it down because if you remember, I said I was hoping it would be under 100 thousandths, and after glue up, it was 104 thousandths or something like that. So I thinned it down to, I think it's 74 thousandths. So I took 30 thousandths of an inch off of this, which is almost a millimeter, or 3/4 of a millimeter. For my millimeter friends, they love it when I put their millimeters in fractions. 0.75 millimeters I took off of that. So anyway, so that stuff's ready to go, but who knows when I'm going to get to it. Oh, and I think Emery's going to start doing the first video or so on the mandolin. That'll start be coming out fairly soon, maybe in another week or two. Yeah, it's just a lot to get done around here. Okay, well, we're going to talk about this dog. And you're thinking, why would you bring that up? I just bringing it up because I know so many of you do like to hear other stories and things. And there's bazillions of pet lovers out there these days. And you're going to think that I'm making stuff up. You're going to think I'm exaggerating. You're going to think all kinds of things. But I just want to ask you to think this first. What benefit would I have to make any of this up? What benefit would I have to, stretch the story? It won't make me rich. It won't get me any more views. I'm just telling you, this is the way I remember it. I asked my brothers and sister what they remembered, and they fed me some stories. I even asked my son if what he remembered. He fed me a story about this dog. You seriously will not believe it. This dog named Sonny would make Lassie look really kind of inept. Like, Lassie, you need to go back to school. It's the truth. It really is. So let me start at the beginning and tell you how Sonny came to be. My dad, as I've mentioned before, is he's in the Hall of Fame for the Missouri Foxtrot Horse Breed Association, and he raised, trained, and sold lots of horses. Well, it just so happened that he sold a bunch of horses to some sort of park rangers or something. Now, I was a kid when this happened, so I was fairly young, I should say. I was probably in my late teens or something. Anyway, I don't remember the whole story on the horses that he sold, but anyway, he sold them to like park rangers out in Wyoming, and they were going to use them for going through their trails out in these public forests and whatever they had to do, and in mountains and everything. And foxtrotters are a very sure-footed horse, and their gait is fast, yet their riding is very smooth. So unlike a quarter horse, and I'm not picking on quarter horse people, but quarter horses are, when they walk, they're really slow, and if you make them go faster, they're very bouncy. Well, these horses can walk really fast, number one, and they're really smooth. So they make an excellent trail riding horse, and they're very sure-footed. So anyway, the bottom line is Dad's sold like 9 or 10 of these horses out there to these rangers, and he was delivering them in a truck. Well, there's a law that so many hours you have to pull over and water the horses, feed them, and all that kind of stuff. So he was doing that along this really deserted stretch of highway. I mean, there was absolutely nothing for miles, he said. And my great uncle was with him on this trip. Gene Duncan was his name. And my mom and my little sister were on the trip with him too. I didn't get to go for whatever reason. And I think they were pulling a couple of trailers and a big truck, and to get all the horses out there. Well, they pull off, and there's a stream there, and so it's just a big mountain and a stream basically, and so they're watering the horses and stuff. And my mom is sitting out of lunch and making lunch and stuff, and my little sister, she's only 5 at the time, something like that, and she wanders down to the stream and she's playing around there. All at once, this dog comes running down the mountainside, I mean, and comes running right up to them. And my dad was a little bit scared at first, thought that this dog was going to attack him or something. And you could just see that he was a very young dog. He was probably only a year and a half, 2 years old at the most, and he was just skin and bones. Somebody had dumped him out. That's what they believe, because there was nothing around there. I mean, for miles. There was no farms, no nothing. So my mom sees how skinny and you could count all his ribs, his hip bones, everything. And so my mom starts throwing out some food for him, and he's over there just chomping it down. Now keep in mind, this dog is starving. About that moment, my little sister slipped and fell in that creek. And I mean, like fell all the way in. And she's, a little girl, she's screaming, and it's cold water, I'm sure. That dog, keep in mind, now he's completely starving. He stops eating, he runs over to my little sister, grabs her by her clothes, and literally drags her out of the stream. My dad's eyes get like this big around. He's going, oh my gosh. He's going, a starving dog just stopped eating and went and rescued that little girl. He couldn't believe it. He says, that dog's going home with me, So that's the first Sonny story. And that's the first encounter they had with him. Well, he rode with him in the back of the truck during that whole trip, and he was very well-mannered, and Dad could tell he was really smart, just really smart, just crazy smart for just a young dog like that. Well, long story short here, moving on down the road, Dad never really had to train this dog to do anything. He talked to him just like a person. I mean, he'd say things like this, and I'm not exaggerating. He'd say, Sonny, go out there in that field, right out there in the middle. He says, there's that big stick. Would you take that over and put that in the truck down there? That yellow truck down there. Just like that. That dog would take off. It might be 100 yards out there. He'd go get that stick, and he'd run another 100 yards back over to the truck and jump up in there and put the stick in the truck, and then he'd come back up to Dad, I mean, just like that. He did stuff like that all the time. Or he'd say, see that white piece of paper out there in the field? Would you go get that, Sonny? He'd take off and he'd go get it, I mean, just like that. Nothing, I mean, like, no more direction than that. And I'm serious when I tell you, he didn't have to train him to do these things. He just did them. I don't know how he knew how to do them. He just did. Okay, so then the stories get way better, trust me. Dad and this dog were totally inseparable. I mean, everywhere Dad went, the dog was with him. I mean, it didn't matter if they were just going to the hardware store, the dog was with him, and the dog was smart enough to and he always rode in the back of the truck. He didn't ride up in the cab, he rode in the back of the truck. And he basically stood up on the back edge of the truck, looked around the window right there by Dad, and that's how he rode, And back in those days, that was acceptable. Nowadays, everybody would just have a total fit, if you had your dog out there afraid it would get hurt, that kind of thing. But anyway, make a long story short, they were inseparable. So Dad would take this dog to the donut shop every morning, because Dad and his old crony friends, they would be down there at the donut shop drinking coffee, eating their donuts. Well, everybody got to seeing how smart this dog was, and that he always stayed in the back of the truck while Dad was in the donut shop. And they all knew the dog and knew how smart he was. And so like the ladies that were in the donut shop, they would always put a donut in a paper bag and walk outside the door and just set it right outside the door. Well, Sonny'd jump out of the truck, he'd run over, grab the paper bag, run back and jump back in the truck, and he'd open up his, donut and eat his donut. Well, Dad would also have him sometimes bring him in the donut shop, and then he'd say something like, Sonny, go out there in the truck and get that newspaper and bring it in here. Well, Sonny would go out there and jump through the window of the open window of the truck. He'd grab the newspaper, he'd come back and, bring it into him. Now, this, I would say, was sort of a trick that Dad always put whatever he wanted Sonny to get, he'd always put it in the same place, So, I mean, this part you could kind of say was a trick and a setup. But where this becomes funny is because, Dick Rabko was the superintendent of the, he was the director of the Spirit of St. Louis Airport. Well, Dick Rabko was pretty well off, and he bought a horse or two from Dad, and they didn't really know each other all that well, but my brother, Scott, worked for Dick Rabko. So it was kind of like that. It's one of those kind of deals where you kind of know somebody, but you don't really know them that well. Well, anyway, he sold Dick a horse, and he's delivering the horse over to Dick Rabko's farm. And so they're out in the, at the pasture or barn or wherever they are, and Dick says to my dad, he says, oh, I need those papers on that horse. Well, of course, Dad put the paper, he sets these things up, you understand. So he had the papers sitting on the front seat of his truck where he always put the stuff that he wanted Sonny to get. And so he had those papers sitting there. And so he says to Sonny, just like I'm talking to you, and Dick's standing right there. He says, Sonny, go over there in the truck and get those horse papers and bring them over here and give them to Dick. So Sonny takes off, he runs over, and he jumps through the window of the truck, and he grabs the papers, he jumps back out, and here he comes, and he drops the papers right there at Dick's feet. Dick's eyes get like this big around. And Dick's already seen the inside of my dad's truck, and there's papers and just trash everywhere, And he's going, how would that dog know, to get those specific papers, Well, as I mentioned, Dad probably had that set up where he put it in the same place every time. But anyway, the point is, the dog was that kind of smart. And literally, he, would just drop him at the person's feet, So that's, an example of where he set up and kind of pulled a prank on somebody. Now, let me show you a picture of Sonny, by the way. So Sonny, he was a blue heeler, and we kind of think maybe because of the shape of his head that maybe he had a little pit bull in him. We don't really know that because we don't know any history on him. This is a picture after he was quite a bit older, you understand. So he was probably in his declining years at this point. But this is the only picture we could find of him. But anyway, back to some of the other stories like that. So Dad had this big riding barn where he trained his horses, and the way the barn was made, it was a big square barn, and you rode on the inside of the barn, but right around the outside edge, and in the middle of the barn was stalls and hay, and everything was piled in the middle. So you basically rode all the way around the barn, and and there was lots of stalls in there. Well, one of the things that Dad would do whenever he would be like maybe running horses through, he would tell Sonny, Sonny, you guard the gate there and don't let the horses out. Well, the horses would be running around there or whatever, and if they'd come toward the gate, well, Sonny would make sure they didn't go through the gate, trust me. And one of the stories I remember distinctly was he got a new stallion, and this stallion was rank, man. I mean, he was, crazy, and just, you could hardly do anything with him. And my mom and Dad went somewhere, and they left Sonny there. Whenever they went together, Sonny didn't go. But if Dad went by himself, Sonny went every time. But anyway, so Sonny stayed there at the farm, and this stallion broke out of his stall. And when Dad got home, well, he didn't see Sonny anywhere around. He was wondering where he was, and Dad wanders down to the barn, and you could just see where this stallion had just wreaked havoc in the barn, just tore up all kinds of stuff, and just knocked things over and, just busted stuff. And so he still didn't see Sonny, and he saw all this havoc. He didn't really know what had caused it at that point, but he saw all this stuff out of place and turned over and everything. So he goes down and he walks around, and sure enough, there's Sonny down in the back end of the barn there, sitting in front of the stall where that stallion was supposed to be, and the stall door was half off, tore off. But Sonny's sitting there holding that stallion in that stall. He did this all by himself. And, so that's the kind of smart that this dog was. I mean, he just knew what to do. It's unbelievable how smart he was. Now, another story, and this is where it really gets good. Dad did have this thing trained. I mean, this part of it was kind of a trained trick. And whatever my mom would set out on the back porch, Sonny was trained to go from the barn. Now you got to remember, you can't even see the back porch from the barn. It's up a hill and kind of over a little bit of an arching hill, so you can't really see the house or the back porch from the barn. But he would tell Sonny, go up to the house and get whatever, and so Sonny knew to go to the back porch, and whatever was sitting there, he'd bring it down. So here's the setup. People would come there all the time, and of course they'd always want to see Sonny do something. And so my dad would do, this was one of his main tricks, he would call on the intercom and tell my mom whatever to do. So, he would sneak away and call my mom on the intercom, of course, and so she'd do whatever he said and put it in a paper sack and set it on the back porch. So this one time Bob Sharp was there, and Bob Sharp was the matter of fact, Bob Sharp's where we bought this Ford 4000 tractor. He was the tractor dealer, and he bought a horse or two from Dad over the years. Well, anyway, he was there, and he says to Bob, well, Bob, do you like eggs? Because Bob wanted to see Sonny do something. So he says to Bob, he says, well, Bob, do you like fresh farm eggs? And Bob says, oh, heck yeah. He says, okay, well, Sonny, you go up to the house and you tell Mary to bring down a dozen eggs. He says, Sonny, go up to the house, tell Mary you want a dozen eggs, and bring them down here and give them to Bob. Sonny takes off, Bob's just standing there like, huh? This can't be true. A couple minutes later, here comes Sonny right back with this paper sack. And, of course, it's got, eggs in it. So Dad opens up the sack and he says, well, Sonny, let's see if you told Mary what, the right number. And so he starts counting them out. Well, wouldn't you know, my mom accidentally or on purpose or whatever put 13 eggs in there. So my dad starts counting them out. He's going, Sonny, I told you we wanted a dozen eggs. Here, you can't even count. And he hands the bag to Bob Sharp, and Bob's just going like, huh? How could this even happen? Of course, like I told you, Dad already had it set up with Mom to do that. But he would also do that in front of people, like he'd say, Sonny, go up to the house and get that sack, or go up to the house and get those syringes from Mary. And so he'd run up there, and he'd bring this sack back, and it would have a bunch of syringes in it or whatever for, like giving shots to the horses or whatever. And he'd do that in front of people, of course, to make them think it was magic, that this dog really knew what was going on, But it was really, really good, the way he would do that. The dog could do anything my dad asked. I mean, anything. People... Everywhere he went, like he would go to horse shows and stuff, and he'd say, people would always come up to Dad and say, all right, have him do something he's never done before. Now, I witnessed this one myself. I witnessed this one myself. We were down by the barn, and people were there looking at horses, and they said, well, yeah, have him do something he's never done before. And Dad's trying to think, well, I don't know. Let me think of something. He says, Sonny, go over there and crawl up on that fence post right there. And it was a corner post, and it was wooden slats, like there was 4 rails or whatever, and it was right on the corner. He says, Sonny, go over there, crawl up on that, and sit down on that fence post right there. You think, oh, come on. And I'm thinking, I knew how smart Sonny was, but I'm thinking, Dad, you kind of overstretched this one a little bit is what I'm thinking. Sure enough, that dog went over there, and he tried twice. He didn't get it on his first try, but he climbed up there, and he actually did sit down on top of that fence post. I swear to you, I saw it happen. You can't believe what this dog could do. It was just amazing. Like one time out in the backyard, there was a plastic bag that had, like from Walmart or whatever, had blown up in this tree. It was just probably about as high as you could reach. Well, Dad says, Sonny, go over there and get that plastic bag out of that tree. Just pointed at it, and Sonny runs over there and he tries to jump, and he could just almost grab it, and he couldn't grab it by jumping. So Sonny Nothing, you didn't have to tell him. He just figured it out on his own. This particular tree had a little bit of a lean and it had a low limb about 4 foot high. Sonny runs around there, jumps up on that limb, jumps on up, and seriously ran out on that limb, got that bag, and came back down that tree. I saw that one too. It's amazing what this dog could do. For instance, this is not a pleasant subject, but one time Dad was out running his beagles, because Dad also raised beagles and liked to rabbit hunt, but he would just run the dogs. In other words, he didn't even have a gun with him or anything. He was just running the dogs and letting them chase rabbits and stuff. Well, Sonny would stay with Dad while he was doing that. Well, this hiker guy comes running by with his dog. The hiker doesn't see Dad. Dad's kind of down under a bank from where this hiker guy is. And the hiker guy, his dog growls at Sonny, and he says, get him, like that. The hiker guy says, get him. Well, that dog takes off, comes at Sonny. Well, Sonny was no dog to be toiled with, trust me. He gets that dog. This was a lot bigger dog than Sonny, and Sonny gets him by the throat and puts him to the ground. And my dad steps out about that time, and he says to the guy, he says, you'll think twice before you sick your dog on another dog again, won't you? And he says, Sonny, turn him loose. Sonny just turns him loose. That dog took off. That's another thing. Sonny could be in the middle of a fight, and Dad would say, Sonny, that's enough. And he'd just stop. Just stop and come back to Dad, Amazing. Just amazing. And you won't find dogs do that very easily when they're in a fight, It's pretty crazy. One last thing here I think I've got, and then, of course he could do all the normal tricks and stuff, shake hands and sit down and all that kind of silly stuff. I mean, he'd do that in his sleep. But he would also, well, there's actually 2 more stories. One, he was really good with livestock, really, really good. Like Dad would, he had pastures all over Missouri. I mean, because he, sold a lot of horses. Well, like he had we had 700. Yeah, that's right. 600 acres. We had leased from, I think it was like a Catholic monastery type deal. Anyway, there were 600 acres there. It was all fenced, and the horses could be anywhere. Well, he would, people would come out to see a horse, and you can't track over 600 acres, and this was kind of back before you had a lot of the ATVs and all that kind of stuff too, And he'd say, Sonny, go get the horses. Man, he'd just take off. He'd take off. You just see him leaving, and going over the hill. 2 or 3 minutes later, here, all the horses. There might be 20 horses, and he'd have them all in a herd, bringing them back, and he'd run them right up to the gate, So he was just invaluable like that as a stock dog. And then he would also find anything you lost. Like, for instance, if you were, building fence or something, and, maybe you dropped your glove, and you realize it when you get back to the truck. He'd say, Sonny, I dropped my glove back there somewhere. Would you go get it? He'd take off, and he'd be gone maybe 5-10 minutes, and he'd come back, and he'd have the glove. Just amazing. I mean, like, I've seen these things happen time and time and time again. I'm seriously telling you, he would make Lassie look like a dumbbell. He really would. And then the last little story I think that I can remember is that, like, my mom and dad always had a lot of chickens too. Well, if you've ever raised chickens, some of them are really, really, really hard to catch. Well, and like they would have to catch the roosters every so often and kind of, that kind of thing. And he'd say, Sonny, catch that rooster over there. He'd run over there and he'd grab it and he'd bring it right to Dad. He never hurt them or anything. He'd just grab them and hold them and bring them over to Dad. And so he was worth his weight in gold. The last ending to Sonny was that when he got really old, as in this picture, and he was even in worse shape, Dad couldn't bear to see him die, so he gave him to one of our really good friends that had a big farm. And Sonny lived out his last remaining, months on this farm, and died a peaceful death. But that was a long time ago. Just looking here to see if I told all the stories. Yeah, that's pretty much it. He was just an absolute amazing dog. I mean, you seriously can't believe what he could do. Never seen anything like it before or since in my whole life. I had a dog here on my farm named Buck, and I was going to try, and he was part blue heeler and part black lab, and I was going to try to train him, kind of try to be like Sonny, and so I gave it my best shot, and he was above average, I'd say, but he was nothing like Sonny. But I trained Buck, and then the reason I named him Buck was because I wanted him to find my deer antler that are sheds here on the farm. Well, right after I trained Buck to find and retrieve deer antler, the next spring, and I'm not kidding, he brought 6 deer antlers out of the woods and laid them on my porch. So Buck was pretty good, but he was no Sonny at all. Sonny was in a class all by himself. I have never seen anything like Sonny was. I'm sure you've got your stories about your animals, and if you want to put those in the comments, I'd be happy to read them. Okay, you know what? Believe it or not, I'm going to try to sing a song. I learned a song between 7 and 7:30 this morning. I'm not kidding. I never have done this song before in my whole life, ever. So it's really stupid to do this, because I tried to practice it like 2 or 3 times between 7 and 7:30, and I didn't get through it without making a single mistake. But I'm going to just do it anyway, just because I want to, just for fun. I mean, today's a little different day. Now, I am going to read the words, because I don't know the words well enough on this song. I normally don't read words, because I normally have all the words memorized. But in this case, I don't. This is, I just heard this the other day on the internet, and again, for the first time in a long time. I mean, I've heard this song my whole life, growing up, seems like. George Jones had this out. It's called She Thinks I Still Care. Just because I ask a friend about her, just because I spoke her name somewhere, just because I rang her number by mistake today, she thinks I still care. Just because I haunt the same old places where the memory of her lingers everywhere. Just because I'm not the happy guy I used to be, she thinks I still care. But if she's happy thinking I still need her, well then let that silly notion bring her cheer. But how could she ever be so foolish? Oh, where would she get such an idea? Just because I ask a friend about her, and just because I spoke her name somewhere, and just because I saw her then went all to pieces, well, she thinks I still care. Yes, she thinks I still care. Well, I didn't make too many mistakes. Probably didn't do it very well, but I got through it anyway. I don't know. Sometimes I hear a song like that and I think, man, I'd like to do that song. I haven't heard that in years. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope I didn't screw it up totally. I can't tell what it comes out like on your end. Oh, let's go to questions. We don't have a lot of time. We got about 12 or, no, let's see, yeah, about 12 minutes or so. The happy knot. How important is proper bass bar shape, weight, and measurement as far as the sound of a fiddle or any other instrument? Well, the easiest answer I got for that is it matters, and it matters quite a bit, and less is more. You know, in other words, cut it as small as you think you can get away with, and you'll be happy. Try to keep it, you know, relatively smooth transition as you go from, you know, maybe in the middle where it's the thickest to the thinnest. You know, don't make everything abrupt. Make it thin and smooth and transition nicely. But light and thin is better than thick and heavy, trust me. So that's the best I can give you. Exact sizes and numbers are impossible to give you because everything's different from one instrument to the next. Stephen Mayo, I just noticed there, says he wonders where he could get a neck reset done. Well, my first question, Stephen, is does it really need it? You know, honestly, I can't say it enough, and you've heard me say it. It sounds like a broken record. So many neck resets are done unnecessarily. Very often, it's some other problem, and you need to fix the other problem. In fact, I'd say conservatively, 9 out of 10 times, it's a different problem from what most people think. So I'm telling you, look at it again and make sure it really needs a neck reset. Very often, it's a different problem. You know, and the way you can kind of tell if it needs a neck reset is if you look down the flat plane of the guitar like this, then this part right here, you should, you know, the perfect setup would be the bottom of the fretboard. I can't think of the words. The bottom of the fretboard right there should be just about flat with this. You know, in other words, that would be perfectly flat. What I meant to say was the top of the fretboard should just about be level with this. Now, anywhere in there is pretty good. Level would probably be just about perfect. The top of the fretboard level with this plane would just about be perfect. That'd be really close to perfect. A little either way is okay, and a whole lot down is probably too much, and a whole lot up is definitely too much. That's when you know you need a neck reset, if it's a whole lot up. If it's up just a little bit, you probably don't need a neck reset. You may have a bulge here, you might have a broken thing here. In fact, this is the perfect example of the broken thing there. You can see right the crack right. Well, I can't point and show it to you, but there's a crack right there, and on this side there's a crack there too. So that's what happens, and then they pull up. Well, you don't need a neck reset, you need to fix this, you know. And in the same way back here, I mean, it could be this, or it could be braces broken. You could see a hump. There's all kinds of things that can cause a problem. Or it could just be a super big underbow in your neck. Maybe your truss rod's really loose, or maybe the neck's twisted. I mean, there's a bazillion reasons why you may not need a neck reset. Check all of those things before you do a neck reset, because you'll still have your problem after you do your neck reset. Okay. I'm off the soapbox. I know I say that almost every single shop talk, but it's really important because that's the thing I see done more than anything, and it's done wrong a lot. Clyde Lewis, I've watched you use carbon paper, sometimes for measuring shaving wood thickness. I was wondering if you ever use it for putting wood patches in for bridge tear out. I'm learning. Thanks. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you definitely can do stuff like that, Clyde. And I've done it. A lot of times I don't even use carbon paper. A lot of times I just do the old pencil lead trick where you just lay the paper on there and you do the lead like this, and then you can see the shape of the hole or whatever in the pencil lead. I do lots of different tricks like that. So sure, yeah, you can do that. Michael 2X says, even the Rosenmeister's mistakes are good. I don't think my wife would agree with that. Tell us about the guitar there on the bench. Well, you just heard it, Earl. Yeah, this guitar is the one that I built. That was the very, very, very first guitar I ever built. It's made out of Paduke, back and sides, redwood top. It's a really, really good recording guitar. People would often hear it in the studio up there, and they'd take their guitar and set it down and record with that one because it records really nice. But anyway, that just gives you a good example of that Paduke sound with the redwood top. Redwood is really good for a top on a guitar. And I made that in 1 week. The reason I made that, I took 1 week's vacation from work and I built that whole guitar in 1 week, including the finish, everything. And the reason I did that was because I had orders to build 2 12-string guitars, and I hadn't even built a single 6-string at that point. So that was the very first guitar I ever built. Now, I mean, there's a billion things I'd do to improve that now, but you know, it was the first one. You got to do, you got to start somewhere. What's the latest on the wild pigs? Well, I don't know if I told you this or not, but you know that I always tell you about the Rosa curse or the Rosa luck, and trust me, it's real. You can believe what you want. Like I told you, I'm the luckiest man on the planet on the big things in life, but all the little things, yeah, different. It's just different. And here's one of those little things, and you ask about the pigs. This is a perfect example. You know, I went to all the trouble, and when I say all the trouble, building that tower was a lot of trouble. It was a lot of work. And I went to all the trouble to build that tower. And one of my main goals is to, from there, I can see the fields good and I can shoot hogs. Even at long distance, I could shoot hogs, even if it's 400 yards, you know. So that was the main reason to build that tower, was to shoot hogs and coyotes. And then, you know, to deer hunt too. But it wasn't so much for the deer hunting, believe it or not. I mean, it definitely would be used for that purpose too. But it was really for the coyotes and the hogs. I am not exaggerating when I tell you this. About 4 or 5 days before I finished it, a helicopter flies over. It's flying 50 to 100 feet above my ground. I mean, it's like touching the treetops almost. And it's coming down in our valley. It's going over where the what I call my Indian field, where we found all the relics. It was swooping up through there. I mean, this helicopter is basically landing high. I mean, that's how low it is to the ground. And he's just swooping everywhere. And he's going over the 3-mile road, which is park ground, and he's going over the over the national forest, and he's just, and you could just tell he was just working things. And about, I don't know, 30 minutes, he's doing this for like 30 minutes, then he takes off. Then the shooting starts. And I am not exaggerating. They shot for pretty close to a full hour, and it never stopped. It was like bang, 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 bang. That kind of shooting. You could tell they were, and what they were doing, I'm just convinced. I haven't been able to confirm this from anybody. I'm convinced they were rounding up the hogs with that helicopter, running them into some sort of maybe a funnel or some kind of pin or something, and then they let them have it. We haven't seen any hog sign since then. That was like 4 or 5 days before I finished the tower. I mean, what are the odds? It's just nuts. It just really is. And don't get me wrong. I kind of don't mind that they're gone, because they just tear up everything. But on the other hand, it's fun to see one or two come through every once in a while and, get a shot at it. But, yeah. That's that Rose of Luck thing I'm telling you about. It's just crazy. Who would ever dream that would happen here, And sure enough, it did. And I bet you they shot, I'm not exaggerating, I bet they shot 200 shots that day. It was crazy how many shots they fired. I mean, it wasn't somebody target practicing, trust me. And at that point, we had heard reports, because that was after rifle season, deer season, and it was before Christmas, I think, was when I got that done. Well, anyway, we had heard reports that people had seen like 30 to 50 hogs in these groups in that same exact area during rifle season for deer. So I'm sure that's what they were doing. Yeah, just crazy. Okay, well, enough on that. Maybe I should edit that Sonny story into a separate story, a separate video. Yeah, you're probably right. I probably should just put it out as a video because I just so wish we would have had some of that on camera and video. Honestly, you wouldn't even believe it. And I'm seriously telling you, that dog and my dad were famous, at least in the circles he ran in. Now keep in mind, he ran in some pretty big circles. He was at lots of big horse shows and things like that all the time because he's in the Hall of Fame for the horses and stuff. And so people knew him from all over even the world, really. And so that dog and him got a lot of exposure, and people just couldn't believe how smart this dog was. He really, seriously, was crazy smart. Just hard to put it into words. It really is. And when you start hearing it from the rest of the family, like my brothers and my sisters, it's just the amazing stories that everybody tells about this dog. It's just stuff you would never think a dog could do. He could do it. Let's see. Michael 2X says he has a Taylor 712 with a 1-inch finish crack. Do you think CA glue is a possible fix? Yeah, I do. The only thing I caution you there is be really, really, really careful with that CA glue because it runs like a duck's butt. I'm seriously telling you, it just goes everywhere. And I was actually, and I think I told this story once before, but I was when I had my workbench where my office is now. I was in my office in there, and I had a young guy from Steelville, Missouri. He was here, and I was working on his mandolin, and I was fixing a few things. I was fixing the bigger problems. Well, he saw me doing this, and he saw me, using the super glue and stuff to fix these problems. And of course, I know how to do that without usually creating too much of a mistake. And even I can have an accident occasionally. Trust me. I mean, I'm not infallible. And so anyway, he sees what I'm doing. He's thinking to himself, well, he could do that, So I guess he got his other mandolin or whatever, and he started to try to glue up some of those cracks. Well, guess what? He brought it to me, and I had to refinish it. I mean, seriously, you can make a mess in a heartbeat with CA glue. So yes, it will work, and it will fix it, but be really careful. If you got to tape it off, that's great. One of the super tricks that you can do with super glue, one of the best tricks, is when you're gluing something, and I'm not going to take the lid off this because I don't want to get glue on this guitar, but one of the tricks is keep the glue bottle up. Don't lay the guitar down and do this. That glue is going to run out like crazy. Keep the bottle up like this and put the glue on like this, and then you can control the glue getting into the crack way better. Make gravity your friend here, barely tip it up versus turning it this way where you have to tip it pretty fast and it'll just run out and make a mess. So that's probably your biggest tip with your CA glue. Thank you so much, Michael, for your contribution there. I really appreciate that. Super chat. Mike Power, would you recommend a newbie changing cracked nut on a Dove? I am woodworker but not a guitar tech. A cracked nut, and so you're talking about the string nut right here, I'm assuming. And if that's the case, all I can tell you about this is that, yeah, you could definitely do that. But I will also tell you in the same breath that that is the hardest thing there is on a guitar during your setup. There's nothing harder than making that nut and making it work well. That is the hardest thing, in my opinion. That's the thing that takes the most time. It's the thing that has to be perfect. And it's just really tough to do a nut, I think. So I always say to people, don't change the nut unless it really needs to be changed. In other words, yeah, if it's broken, if it's, definitely if it's cut way too deep and it's, buzzing and things, you got to make a new nut. I agree with that. But don't just change it because you want to make it a bone nut versus a plastic nut. You're not going to get enough bang for your buck there to do that, at least at my prices. In other words, if I got to do it for you, you're going to pay a lot of money for that because it's going to take me probably an hour. So you're going to pay $100 at least to put a new nut on that. And you're not going to get much bang for your buck unless the nut is actually broken or there's a real physical problem with the nut. That's my nut speech. Mr. Rosa, I think you are busy. Trust me, you have no clue. You should just follow me around and just write down everything I do in a day. I'd be scared to read it. In-size taper gauge from Amazon. It's like $65. Yes, that's true. Yes, that is true. In-size taper gauge, they're wonderful. I use them all the time. I sent one to Randy, and he liked it, I think. And I gave one to Caleb, too. One of the favorite country songs. That was Bill. Thank you, Bill Mumbo from London. Well, cool. I always liked that song. George Jones, I got to tell you my quick George Jones story. I never actually met George. I never did. But we used to open for lots of country stars. And we were opening at the, can't remember the name, Rickman Auditorium, not Ryman Auditorium, Rickman Auditorium in Arnold, Missouri, and they would have these national, country bands and artists come in there all the time. I mean, we opened for Diamond Rio, Patty Loveless, Merle Haggard. Got to eat a steak dinner with Merle. I really did. Me and Merle sat down at a table and ate a steak dinner together, just he and I. It was awesome. Well, they liked us and they booked us there a lot, and so to open for these country acts. Well, this one time they said you can either open for Diamond Rio or you can open for George Jones. And I'm thinking George Jones for sure. That would be awesome. And because Diamond Rio at the time was brand new, and they only had a couple of hits out and stuff. I mean, they weren't real established at that moment, although they were gaining ground and going to be really big. Well, anyway, so we said George Jones. Well, they said, well, George Jones is on XYZ day, and you'd have to be. We went, sorry, we're already booked for that day. We can't do George. I guess we'll take Diamond Rio. So we ended up opening for Diamond Rio, which was the week after George Jones. So we get there for the Diamond Rio opening, and I said, how did the George Jones thing go last week? And the guy looks at me, he's like, oh my gosh, he says, are you ever glad you didn't open for George? And I said, what do you mean? He says his band came out and played for 45 minutes. George didn't show. And then finally, after 45 minutes, George came out on stage. And he was so drunk he couldn't stand up, and he staggers over there and he starts playing his first song, and he messes it up, and he just screws it up totally, and he's mad, so they go to the next song and he screws it up, and So now they're on their third song. So this is George's appearance at the Rickman Auditorium. And so they're on their third song. He screws that one up. And he yells out an explicative that starts with the letter F. And the second word was it. And he throws the guitar down and he walks off stage. And that was the George Jones story. So I'm glad I didn't open for George. We opened for Diamond Rio, and those guys were awesome. And I got to talk to one of them backstage, and I talked to him for over an hour. This was before the show started. I talked to him for over an hour. Had no clue he was one of the Diamond Rio guys, because I didn't know anything about Diamond Rio at the time. I wasn't following them. I just knew who they were and knew that they were starting to get some hits, you know. Turned out he was the lead guitar player for Diamond Rio. When the curtain came up, my mouth just fell open. I was like surprised. I thought he was one of the road crew guys, you know. I really did. I did not know it was one of the Diamond Rio guys. And he and I just hit it off. You know, we talked for over an hour, you know. Crazy. So anyway, it's pretty cool. Clyde Lewis, thank you so very, very much, Clyde, for that super chat there, that donation. I appreciate it. Well, we're about out of time. Let me just see if we got one more question here. Love your shop vac setup. What kind of shop vac do you use that is powerful enough to do what you do? I don't think my Rigid will do it. Yeah, Mike, it's not really a shop vac. It's one of those dust collectors. I got it from Grizzly. And, you know, mostly the reason I buy Grizzly stuff because they're just a couple hours away here in Springfield. That's probably the biggest reason. But anyway, it's setting outside this wall here. In other words, on the other side of the wall, it's still under this covered roof. But it's, you know, that way it's not so loud. And it's I'm going to say a 2 horsepower motor. Maybe it's 3 horsepower, but it's at least 2 horsepower. And it's just a big, tall canister. There's the collection bag on the bottom, a cyclone thing in the middle, and then the top bag is the air escape, or whatever you want to call it, air filter or whatever. So that's all it is. It's just one giant bag, and it's a 6-inch port. I ducted that down to 4-inch. So all my stuff is 4-inch PVC. I will tell you that on the 4-inch PVC, I have the whole thing wrapped with wire, with a thin wire. In other words, after I put the PVC in place, I took wire and I wrapped all the way around it and I grounded the wire. Now, you will think, oh, that's kind of overkill. You don't need to do that. Well, it's for 2 reasons. Number one, it's to ensure there won't be any explosions, because sawdust, believe it or not, is very explodable, especially in a big area and a lot of dust in the air. It will explode. Trust me, it can. Matter of fact, where you see dust exploding a lot is in like granaries and things like that, big silos where they pump in a lot of grain and all that fine dust is in the air. That can definitely explode and just blow the whole thing apart. So it's for explosion first. Second thing is to keep from getting shocked. That, you know, if you don't do that, your hoses and everything, when you're trying to vacuum, the hair will just raise up on your arms and the hair will raise up on your head. I mean, the static builds up, and man, when you touch something, it will just about knock you down. So that wire around that PVC keeps all that static completely out of there. I don't ever get shocked. Never. And that's unusual for me. Trust me, I'm the guy that gets shocked just by standing up out of a chair. So, yeah, you definitely want to do that if you put in a system like mine. But the best part of my system is those gates I made. And I've showed that in a video or two. And those gates are killer. Trust me. Way better than any of that crud you can buy. And, well, maybe not better than those expensive aluminum ones or something. I've never used those because I never had the money to spend $100 on each gate, you know, because I need 10 or 12 gates. So anyway, but aside from the possibility of those really expensive gates, you can't beat these gates I made compared to those cheap plastic ones you'd buy. Toby Cadenhead said, gave me a donation. Thank you very much, Toby. I really do appreciate it. Oh, okay. Yeah, and then John English, he made a comment, says, looks like you missed out on some tasty sausage and bacon. Yeah, with those guys killing all those hogs off. Yeah, and we haven't seen any signs since. I mean, like none. No tracks, no nothing. I seriously think they probably killed 40 or 50 hogs that day. There was probably at least 200 shots, and I'm not kidding. I mean, they shot for like almost a solid hour. It just never stopped. So I think the helicopter was rounding them up, running them into some kind of pens or something, and then the shooting started. Crazy. Yeah, sawdust creates a static electricity and will cause shocks. That's for sure. I agree with that one. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed today. I hope you didn't think it was too weird talking about Sonny. But he was just an amazing animal. I never see anything like the guy. It was fate. You know, you just think about the odds of all of that happening. They stop along this crazy abandoned roadside stream. I mean, there wasn't nothing around. And this dog just comes and just like appears, you know. And then, and he lived a long life. I don't know how long that dog lived, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that was in the late 70s when they got him. And he was still around in the 90s. So, you know, I mean, he lived a long time. So, anyway, he had a good life, and I know everybody enjoyed him. Y'all, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place.